I was in court earlier this week. Young lady pled guilty to possession of a handgun and possession of narcotics. She was a passenger, a front seat passenger in a car that was stopped for a routine traffic stop. Handgun was found in her purse, and some narcotics were found in a tampon container inside of her purse. The young man who was seated in the back seat was charged with possession of a firearm and drug trafficking. The minimum offer from the state's attorney's office was 5 years without parole. It's my understanding that the state's attorney prosecuting this case did not have authorization from her supervising attorney to offer him anything less than 5 without parole, even though he was a passenger in the back seat and the guns and drugs were found in her purse and she pled guilty. If you were elected state's attorney, would you give your prosecutors more discretion in the way that they handle these cases, or would you keep the same type of, I guess, quota or guideline on them, demanding that they seek mandatory minimum sentences even when they don't think the defendants deserve it?
That's a major problem that as a defense attorney I've dealt with on an ongoing basis myself. The problem is that as the Minister of Justice, you are to make sure that each case is looked at on a case-by-case basis. So let's look at this particular situation you've identified. Clearly there are facts that would suggest or support that at least whatever the culpability took place or within that area. You know, even if you try to stretch and say it's within wingspan or arm's reach, I'm sorry. It means he'd have to have reached over and engaged in that activity. When you have a young man that's in the back seat, and depending on if he doesn't have a record, you have to aggressively prosecute the crimes that are going to become a potential problem for the community. But at the same time, you have to look forward as to what am I about to do with this young man's life. If he doesn't have a record, if he's had no prior contact with the criminal justice system, and he's gotten caught up, and that's with that over-prosecution. You know, just like I always use the analogy when we used to talk about deadly illnesses. You know, cancer is an example. When you do that chemotherapy, not only are you killing off the bad cells, but you also potentially kill off some of the good cells. That's a prime example right there. You've got a bad situation where you want to get rid of it, but you've also, because you're aggressively prosecuting, you've caught up a potential somebody who could be a mayor, another delegate, or maybe even the state's attorney, or an attorney, or a doctor. But because once you put that stigma on him, that felony conviction on this kid, that's a wrap. And even if you try to minimize it, I mean, we know right now that the simple possession of marijuana is more than enough to jeopardize your ability to obtain financial aid. So now you're talking about a felony, which we can bypass the financial aid for college, because that's out the door. Now you're talking about your employability. That's out the door. And so now what are you doing? You're leaving them limited options. And human survival says, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to take care of me and my family. And so if you leave that young man in that situation, now you've got a potential person who's going to go back and come around in this revolving cycle, as opposed to somebody who could have been redirected in another direction where he's going to do something positive. Now, I do believe that all crime has to be prosecuted, but I do believe that discretion has to be exercised, and exercised wisely, which is why part of my platform is equitable and efficient prosecution. Each case should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. That to me also is a problem, because when you look at how that's done, you can't get authorization. Your leadership is only as good as its people, and the people are only good as its leadership. That sends a terrible message to me from an administration. It means if I can't trust you to exercise appropriate discretion to keep the system moving along, not for the sake of just copping out on a plea, but doing what's in the best interest of justice, and I can't trust you to do that, then you don't need to be working for me. And if that's your attitude, that's all that you can do, is you're going to give out marching orders when you're not in the trenches with me on a day-to-day basis to see what's going on, then I don't need to work for you.